Into it, pull the cork out. This is a pickle bottle, and this is some other type of food bottle. Don't know what type of food that had in it. Drinks were the same way. Either they drank what water they could find, but then not always was it safe. So if they had a chance or had the money, sometimes they'd drink something like this. These type of bottles are made of stoneware. They're called ginger beer. Ginger is a type of food. Your parents may use it for a spice to cook with, but they would make an alcoholic beverage out of it. Not strong in alcohol, but nonetheless it had alcohol. A lot of times, if you had this in the area, parents would even let their children drink it. Not because it was alcoholic, but because the water had to be boiled to make it. So because they boiled the water became safe to drink, so they would let their children drink it. Back behind you here, the soldiers not always were able to go buy something. If something broke, or if they needed to replace something or needed an extra one, they had to make it. And so like we talked about the bottles needing corkscrews to get them out, that's a corkscrew. Instead of having a normal handle, it has a tree root handle. So you could see, you could take a corkscrew, put it through a tree root, and that would be the handle for your corkscrew. This is a die. They like to gamble. They like to throw dice just for fun. That was one of the games they played. This fellow made one out of a piece of beef bone. This is a piece of bone that he's drilled little holes into and then colored them black. And so I only have one of them. The other one didn't make it to me. It got lost somewhere in the last 150 years. Ink pens. They didn't have ink pens like you have now. They had dipped pens. They'd have a well of ink, a little bottle of ink, a jar of ink. You'd have to dip your pen into it and then write on your paper. This fellow lost the handle for his pen, and so what he decided to use was a rib bone. He ate his ribs, and he used the rib bone for a handle. So you can see they didn't waste anything, bone or roots or whatever. Down on the far end in the tall glass case, you can see some different writing tools. There's an ink pen and a pencil. Also on that little desk is a flat wooden handled device with kind of a sharp point. That is an eraser. They did not have rubber, so they would have to scrape off their mistakes. When they made a mistake writing with their ink, they would actually take the edge of that, scrape the paper away a little bit, because the paper was thicker and the ink was thicker. And so that's how they would correct their errors. The watch is a pocket watch, and next to it is a key. That's how they wound their watch. They had no battery watches, no self-winding watches, so that every day they had to put that little key into the back of the watch, crank up the spring inside there so that it would keep accurate time. The coffee pot, like I said, they all like their coffee. The coffee pot is called a sidewinder. You see how the spout comes out of the side rather than opposite the handle. This is a Civil War period toothbrush. The handle is bone. The bristles are made from pig hair, boar hair. And you can see that the way the handle is worn, the bristles are worn, either one, this fellow had only front teeth or he only brushed his front teeth because it's worn. All he did was go up and down. There was no side action, nothing worn out. So I thought that was pretty cool the way but not all the soldiers took care of their teeth. Medicine was not a very founded science at that time. They didn't know a lot of things. And because they didn't know a lot of proper medical treatment, a lot of the men who were wounded in the war, if they got shot in the arm or the leg, they would just wind up having that arm or leg cut off. And so that's what these are a pair of Civil War era crutches. You can see those. A lot of the soldiers lost legs during the war and arms. When the doctors were doing the operation, they didn't have anesthesia to put you to sleep a lot of times. So sometimes you just have to scream and yell or whatever. But a lot of these guys, while they were doing that medical operation, they didn't want to be unmanly. They thought it was unmanly to scream or yell, so they would put a bullet of soft lead in between their teeth and bite down on it to keep from screaming out in pain.
So they would bite down?
They would just bite it. In other words, instead of just gritting their teeth, when you ever something bad happens to you, that hurts, well, they would put a bullet in there to bite down on it. This medical device is called a phleem. If you got sick back then, you're running a fever or something, medicine thought you might have had too much blood in you. We need to get some blood out of you. So they would go into a pond and get a leech. You ever seen a leech? It's a little, they'd put a leech on you and let that leech suck some blood out of you, maybe you'd get better. But then they thought, well, that's harder to find leeches. So they took this is a very little sharp point. They'd hit your blood vessel and let you bleed out a little bit, patch you up, and you're on your way, and hopefully your fever was gone. So you didn't go to the doctor for no reason. It's like, Mom and Dad, I've got a fever. Oh, good, let's bleed some blood out of you. Yeah, not too good. So you learn quick, kind of tough things out. And folks, I heard your bell ring, so I'm sure that means you're supposed to head for the next station. Thanks for paying attention. Sorry your time was so short. You're welcome.
What's in those cases?
Those cases is a military carbine, a pistol, and a saber. I couldn't get them out this morning because it was too wet.
That is too much. Oops, sorry.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you guys this morning? Good. My name's Jerry, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Civil War here in our area. Okay. Kansas was one of the main reasons for why the war occurred, and there was fighting here in Kansas up to 6 years before the war even started, because there was a lot of controversy over how Kansas would come into the Union as a state. Would it be a slave state or would it be a free state? In other words, would it be free of slavery? And so there was fighting here as early as 1855, 6 years before the Civil War started. Then in November of, well, let me tell you a little bit about this area. Crawford and Cherokee counties here were not counties at that time. They belonged to the Cherokee Indians and was called the Cherokee Neutral Lands. So the Cherokees owned it. The white people came in here and settled on this land, and they had no business being here. Finally, in 1859, the Cherokees had had enough of that, of people living on their land, and so they asked President Buchanan, says, get these white people off our land down there. And so he sent troops in here, and they went across the neutral lands and chased all those settlers out. They got up here to the north end of the county, and winter was setting in, and so the troops left, and all the settlers just kind of came back in and settled on the land again, so that happened. But that was important that this was the Cherokee Neutral Lands, and it had a big impact on us here during the Civil War, because there was no organization, there's no law enforcement, nothing like that. So then in November of 1860, Abraham Lincoln's elected president, and he's an anti-slavery man. And so the South was tired of all the controversy about slavery, and so they said, well, we'll just leave and become our own country. So just a month after Lincoln's elected, South Carolina secedes from the Union, says we're going to leave the United States and form our own country and call it Confederate States of America. Okay. A month after that, in January, Mississippi does the same thing, and then the other southern states follow. By April of 1861, the first battle in our area took place over at Carthage, Missouri, and there was people from here in this area that were involved in that. They were mostly the Union men, and it was so early in the war that they didn't even have uniforms, so they went and fought in just civilian clothes, and so during the battle there it was hard to tell which side somebody was on.